Hello. This is going to be a very different video for me. Um, I have a kind of outline, but I'm just going to be talking to you all. In order to explain the reasons that we're planning on doing what we're doing at the conservatory, I thought it'd be helpful to just go through some of the thinking in the background and give you a quick kind of overview of the reasons for the decisions, and then we'll talk about the policies that we're planning to put in place for the coming school year. First of all, the story of Taiwan, which is just amazing. I think many people are not aware of the fact that Taiwan actually began their response to this pandemic December 31st, 2019, before any other country. When the World Health Organization did their evaluation of which country was most at risk, they thought that Taiwan would have the second leading death rate, infection rate in the world. And it's partly because they have millions of people in their country that go back and forth between China and Taiwan for work and family and various reasons. So, December 31st, they had their response. What they did was stopped flights from China, began screening any flights from anywhere. They screened everybody. Screening meaning that they took surveys, got medical information, found out where people had been. They also have this app that they started using, and they just traced if anybody got the disease. They traced all the people that they had been in contact with, quarantined anybody that had been in contact with somebody who was infected, but they never had to go through a lockdown. Both Taiwan and Korea have not had to go through a lockdown yet. So lockdown is actually an indication that a country has waited too long to respond to the pandemic. And because of that, there is community spread, and there's no way of handling it effectively other than locking everybody down and trying to implement after the fact the kinds of policies that they should have implemented initially at the beginning of this pandemic. So Taiwan is a wonderful success story. They've had just over 400 cases out of 23 million people and 7 deaths. And obviously every single one of those deaths is tragic. But comparing that to the whole rest of the world, it's absolutely amazing and wondrous. Now, just to be really clear, it is actually too late for us in India to implement that kind of policy and to have that kind of effective response to the disease because it's already spread all over the country. And if you compare Taiwan to the United States, obviously the US ignored it, acted like it wasn't a problem. And because of that, over 100,000 people have died as of May 25th, 2020. That's tragic. Everybody's going to die at some point. The death rate in every generation is the same. 1 out of every 1 people dies. But they didn't have to die in this kind of tragedy where you're separated from everybody, your family cannot be there with you. Even after you've passed, people can't get together for funerals. It's just horrible. It's a nightmare scenario. So, that's the story of the US. I've learned a few lessons from the last several months just following what's happening. First lesson is that leadership makes all the difference. Second is that we really have to be proactive with these kinds of diseases and this kind of situation, meaning that we deal with the situation before it becomes an emergency. We deal with it as an emergency before it destroys people's lives. And third lesson, governments do not always have our best interest in mind. Or they don't know how to handle things in a way that is beneficial to everybody in the country. So, a couple things I want to go through this as quickly as we can. First is I just want you to see some of these illustrations from the MIT study of sneezing and the conclusions that just being 6 feet away is probably not sufficient, especially if you're in an enclosed room. When we sneeze, our droplets can go more than 27 feet, which is more than the width or the depth of most of our classrooms at the college. And people can be infected by that. the droplets linger in the environment, especially on surfaces, for a number of hours and in some cases as much as a couple of days. So we have to be hyper diligent even if we're going to use facilities at all. But having a regular class in the classroom at this point in the pandemic is impractical if we're concerned about everybody's health. Paul Romer has suggested, he's an economist in the US, he suggested that if we're really going to reopen the economy, what we have to do is test everybody in the country every 2 weeks. Now, my guess is that that's not going to happen in this country, and it's not going to happen in most countries. But to make sure that everybody is safe in a reopening, and to deal with the situation now that it's rampant, kind of like Taiwan did at their initial state, would require that level of testing. Since we cannot expect the government to either provide massive testing, and the vaccine will almost certainly not be available until the end of the year at best, we have to create our own policies that do have the best interests of all of our students, staff, and faculty in mind. So our plan A is to not have in-person classes for the entire school year. So SMS obviously is going to be online. Classes the first semester will be online. Second semester also. Now, if by some medical miracle, if God's grace works in the genius of these people's minds who are working on these vaccines, and we're able to actually have access to a vaccine by the end of this year, then we can begin the second semester on campus. Otherwise not. It simply isn't safe. Plan B is if that vaccine becomes available before the end of the year, then we will have online classes. We will have in-person classes. So we'll go to that in-person plan as soon as we can. But that may not be until this time next year. It may not be until later than that. I think it will happen before this time next year, but we don't have any guarantee of that. And that's all I wanted to say. One quick comment. I'd like to just give you a exhortation as well as a commendation. I went through and did the calculations, and I will try to illustrate that. If you look at the numbers from April 3rd, I did extrapolation. It was just simple math, where I went through the numbers from the percentage of increase of deaths on a daily basis as of April 3rd. For about 3 weeks, the increase in the number of deaths was going up by 10% or more leading up to April 3rd. So extrapolating from that and actually keeping everything very, very conservative, if you assumed a 10% growth on a daily basis, for those of you who know the 70 or 72 rule, you don't need to know this, but if you take any percentage of growth and you divide 70 by that percentage, that gives you the number of times that you have to have that percentage of growth in order to double the numbers. Now, with this disease, when we were hovering around 10% growth every single day, and by growth I mean growth in numbers, that meant you have a doubling of the rate about every 7 days. So if we extrapolated from the over 60,000 deaths at the time of April 3rd and simply increased that by 10% per day, you have a doubling. So if you double it from April 3rd, so April 3rd, April 10th, April 17th, April 24th, April 31st, anyway, you get the idea. Every 7 days it would have doubled. By now we would have had 7 doublings if we had maintained that 7% growth rate in the number of deaths. Now, to be really clear, we have not maintained that 10% rate because about 2-3 weeks before April 3rd, several countries started their lockdowns, including India. And we began to see a decrease in the percentage growth of the deaths from that time. So now we are now at about a 1% growth rate per day, which is still horrendous because the numbers are so large, but it's so much better than it was before. So I just want to commend everybody. I don't know if you've been processing the math, but if we had not had lockdowns around the world, by now, if you had 7 doublings, 60,000, 120,000, 240,000, 580,000, and so on, by now we would have had over 7 million deaths from COVID-19. In other words, because you and I and people like us all over the world have stayed home, we have prevented about 7 million deaths from this disease just up until this point. So it's an unusual time in history. There are great heroes who are on the front lines dealing with this disease in the medical profession. And there are also people who are simply staying home. And by staying home, we are a part of a community that has saved over 7 million lives. So, for those of you who are staying home, like I am, you're a hero. You're part of a solution to a problem unlike anything that has been faced by the human community in the last 3 generations. So, again, we will plan on not having in-person classes. We'll continue with online classes for the coming year. I'll put out more details about how we will implement that as the days pass. And we'll also give you details about how we're going to deal with ensemble class, the ensemble requirements for your degrees, how we're going to deal with recitals for the final years. I'll send out a separate message to the final years. And, let's just soldier through this. It's an unusual time. God will give us the grace to continue to trust in Him and to continue to grow and develop as human beings, and hopefully to remember the things that are really important in our lives. These are the best of times, these are the worst of times. And let's do everything that we can for our lives, at least, so that we can make these the best of times. God bless you all.